My name is Tobias Petri. I am the sales director at MyBluLabel Compliance Services. I have a background from Copenhagen Business School and from the health tech startup scene. With that said, Deb, I guess you made most of the introductions
for the online audience. I will just do it now.
Then I encourage you to come over here and take my spot, and Deb will make the introduction.
Yeah. So welcome to everyone, also you who are online, and I really appreciate everyone attending physically or virtually. I think today is about the basics and the foundations about compliance, and even some of you who are very advanced in compliance, I hope you will take from this some learning, some inspiration, some ideas, because what we are trying to do is to set the new global standards for compliance. And first on stage is Kenn Milton, who is the founder of the company. Kenn has a lot of experience in compliance, and without doubt, he is Mr. Know-how.
Yeah.
And
so, as Deb says, this is a workshop which is one of 4, and we're going to start with the basics. And just to start with the basic, we're also going to talk about quality and compliance. But before that, we need to define hard law and soft law. Hard law would be requirements from regulatory agencies like EU. It could be in the US FDA. It could be within chemistry. It could be within transport. It could be within toll and customs. It could also be regarding medical devices. I know a lot of you is in the space of medical devices, ISO standards and FDA. And all this hard law is really triggered by market access. So if you're not complying with hard law, you cannot go to the market with your product or services. Soft law is something that we're seeing more and more, and it has a global trend. It's actually the most fast growing trend, probably driven by the climate change. But now there's an increased focus on sustainability, development goals, UN Global Compact, B Corp, and green compliance. These kind of compliance areas are not hard law, but it's something that the companies are looking into today. And often the companies like Novo Nordisk, Lundbeck, and others are saying that you need to comply with these new soft laws because we have a global commitment in our company, and we expect you to do it as well. Novo Nordisk, for example, has 60,000 suppliers that are now having a requirement of considering green compliance. And this is something that we can look into as well. When we're talking about hard law and soft law, we also need to talk about quality and compliance. Because what is compliance and what is quality? Quality is kind of like a measurable, it's poor quality, it can be great quality, but compliance is only one standard. And compliance is the minimum expected requirements for you to get market access. So you want to be on the compliance level if you are in the regulated industry. What you should aim to do is, because you need to get approval to get to market, it's always good to be above compliance level, because then you're having an easier time when you are in an audit. There will always be room for improvement, but if you aim to be above compliance, quality beyond compliance is a term that is widely used, then you have a better set off when you're meeting an auditor. When we are talking about workshop 1, we also need to talk about the foundation about compliance. And the foundation about compliance is really documentation. And my statement or bold statement is, if you get the compliance and documentation right, then you're 80% where you want to be. If you don't get documentation right, then it doesn't matter whatever activities you're doing, because you're going to be measured on the documentation of your product and services. And the road for documentation starts actually as soon as you find your laptop is not sufficient enough to store your data. You need to think about, how do I continue my business if my laptop breaks down? So the first thing you do as a startup, you're going to go in and look for Dropbox, you're going to look for Google Sheet, you're going to look for SharePoint, I think is the next step. So there are these drivers for documentation, even in the smallest companies. But as your business grows, you have a larger responsibility, and you need to also start signing these documents. Because if you document and you do not sign, then it doesn't count for anything. And we have a statement in the end for this. Also, at the very last end, products needing to go to market, we are in life science considering patient safety, product quality, and data integrity. And it doesn't really matter if you're in construction, manufacturing, defense, if you're in services or sustainability, or all of them at one time, you need to consider yourself for documentation. And in one end, of course, it's business continuity, and the other end is market access. So documentation is it's the key for everything that you do. And how does documentation fit into the puzzle? It's actually a piece of the puzzle, but it's a major piece in the puzzle. It's on the top of this pyramid, and if you are at one point of time need to implement the QMS system, you will find it in the location that is marking the spot there, together with training. Because you need to be trained, you need to be qualified to actually author this documentation and also to approve this documentation. And in the other workshops, we're going to touch upon some of the other boxes up here. Risk management and post-market surveillance are really key topics at the moment, and this is where the auditors go in today and say, show me your risk management file, show me how you do post-market surveillance, but everything is linked up to documentation. What we are saying in the next generation of compliance, we want to start automating the very trivial tasks, like putting your version control on, putting your logo in the corner, making sure that the header and footer matches all the way in the documentation. And we can actually do that today. So we're actually bringing up into the new tech industry already today. Compliance tech has it has a rumor, or it's possibly also the fact that it's possibly 10 years behind of other tech in any other industry. And our aim is that we will revolutionize this, and we want to bring the tech that is available in other industries into the life science and into the regulated industry as well. Of course, we're going away from paper, but what we also want to do is that we want to put it in electronically, and we want to present it in a good way. It's good for you when you are working on it on a daily basis, so you're always in control. Which documents are we working on? Which documents are in approval? Which ones are released? But also, when you have done this, there's a task where you can go in and say, how often does this document need to be reviewed? And we can go in and measure on this, and so you have the nice dashboards. And in addition, for you to have this very nice benefit is that when you are in an audit and you show this dashboard to an auditor, they will say, this is really, really good. What we want to do in addition is that we want to transform this whole industry. We want to not only automate, but we will also put AI into the equation. So we do have a project, as Deb is saying, with FMC. And one of the things that we're doing there is that we are monitoring the regulations. We're looking for changes in the regulations, and we're going to bring those pieces out, and we want to present it in a digital way so we can see if a regulation has changed, what has changed, and does it have an impact on our company, which is then FMC. Last thing, and if you only need to take 2 sentences away from this presentation, is that if it's not documented, it has not happened. And it means that you can do all kinds of nice and innovative things, but if you have not documented those steps that you have taken, nobody wants to touch that software or that algorithm, because they need to present documentation to the auditors. And in the end, the product or service is not any value add if you don't have the documentation that can document what you have done. Second sentence here is that if it's not approved, it's not documented. So you cannot be a coder, or you cannot be a single person writing all your documentation down. It could be very nice, but if it doesn't have a second review and an approval, then you cannot call it documented. Compliance should be a business advantage. It should not be something that you need to do or out of necessary evil. And if I'm going into a corporation, normally I say quality and compliance, everybody leaves the room and I'll be the only one there and I'm doing all the work. But if people really learn to use compliance the right way, it will actually tell you what is needed upfront.
From the specialist point of view, you now got an idea of the foundation. Now we're moving on to someone who's heading up FMC Corporation and has been instrumental in setting up the collaboration together with his employees in between FMC Corporation and MyBluLabel Compliance Services.
Basically, I've been spending 20 years in strategy and in supply chain and operations. And I've been doing that in industries that either manufacture or distribute or consume chemicals. So in many ways, you could say that I've been working 20 years in compliance management. So I do have something to say about this. And compliance, the way I see it, it must be a core value, right? And that seems evident. But it's not the kind of core value that you print out from the intranet, you slap it on the wall, and then you sort of look at it from time to time. Compliance obviously is a way that we are really acting together. We are working with integrity, we have ethics, and we are just compliant to the laws and regulations. It's the way that we have to operate. There's just no doubt. And that goes for sales transactions, of course. It goes for vendor negotiations. It's a Christmas lunch these days also. In my area, it's for operations, and in particular, really in safety management, where if you don't comply with the rules of, let's say, the country, you may have to be complying or answering to the rules of nature instead. So really, really very important. I can't underscore it enough how important it is that we have it as a core value. And it really means that you work compliantly without really looking over to the financial performance. That is not something that is relevant. It's not something we need to sort of balance against each other. Compliance comes first. So that's evident possibly, right? But you probably remember the plant in Jiangsu in China that exploded in 2019. Do you remember that one? You probably do when I tell you about it, because not only 78 people died because of that, and half of the industrial park was shattered. There was glass broken 5 kilometers away from the explosion, right? But subsequently, the Chinese government went in there, changed the regulations, shut down 3,000 chemical plants. And why you know of this is because you probably felt this in terms of having to deal with a year of supply disruptions. Remember that in 2019 and 2020, supply disruptions everywhere. And you probably had to rethink your supply chain strategy also. And maybe also look at your force majeure clauses, really. So that's something that I still remember quite well. We have a corporate headquarters in Philadelphia. And not long after the explosion in China, there was a similar explosion in Philadelphia. A refinery exploded. It was so great an event that a vessel, a 20-ton vessel, was flown out of the site across a river 700 meters and landed right on the footpath of where our colleagues normally go for walks during lunch. So imagine you go there with your coffee and sandwich in hand, and here comes like a missile, 20 tons missile, right? So it can be really devastating if you're not really complying with the laws of the country and the laws of nature, you would say here. I see it like compliance must be something we have to look at every day. It's not just the day that the auditors are arriving, it's every day, right? So easy said, very difficult to do. I read that there are 3 million laws out there. There are some lawyers around here, so I blame you, but that's a lot of laws out there, right? And how do you understand all these laws here? Plus you have new laws coming up, you have extensions into new countries, you have regulations, you have interpretations, and then sometimes you even have derogations coming the other way there. So it's a crazy world out there in terms of the laws. So it's very likely that even if you're a company with compliance as a core value, maybe it's not so easy to get it right every day, right? And for that, really, we need to help. We need the help of technology to get this right here. So what we're doing at our plants, in Europe, we are operating 6 plants. It's crop protection. So, it's very important that we get it right, both for our employees, but also for our customers who are the farmers and growers of the world, for the population who need food, and also you can say to nature, because we need to treat it well. So with all that, we need to do something a little bit above and beyond, just being compliant to the ISO audit. I mean, we do that. We do the Dakota audits, we run process hazard analysis assessments, we run triple ISO certificates and all that stuff. But we need to do more. We need to somehow be sure that we are compliant every day, and this is where technology comes in place. You can't look up 3 million laws and check whether you're compliant there. But we are working with some companies that are helping us to identify what are the key rules and regulations per country that we need to look at. And right now, for example, we are running as a part of a sort of continuous improvement, a process where we have 2,000 rules that we have selected that are particularly of importance to us, and checking out against those. So that's going quite well so far, but you can imagine it's quite time consuming really. This is everything from rules about storage of toxic waste to how to manage your canteen, right? So there's a lot of rules out there. So we work with compliance management companies, and this is where Kenn, you want to listen up here, right? So we really are very happy with our vendors. They get us access to databases. We get newsletters about things that are happening. We can design and refine the search parameters. So it's very important for us to have this good collaboration here with some really good and strong and established vendors at the market here. But I feel, or we felt, that it's not really enough for us. It's fine to know here's a new law, you got 3 months to implement it. But what if we could be ahead of the curve here? What if we knew something happening before it actually happened? Right? That's what we want to know, because you don't necessarily change the way a structure works in a plant in 3 months' time. It takes time just to get the budget for it. So we want to know rules that are upcoming. We want to be, proactive. We want to get the detailed information that is sort of tailor-made to us. And that's why we're working with the MyBluLabel services here. And so far, we're running a pilot. I say it runs really well. I'm happy with what I've seen so far. We didn't break the bank really, getting to where we are today. Don't tell them. But it's been a reasonable startup. And what I've been really impressed of is the agility that you can actually achieve by working with a startup. I mean, things are happening so fast that it makes us look slow, and we don't really want that. But on the other hand, it's important because we want to get this project rolling fast. So that's really quite nice one. I see it as a competitive advantage. Right? It's something for the last 20 years, I've been lucky enough to work with companies that see compliance as a competitive advantage. So it's not something that I needed to sell to the CEO. It was just ingrained in the way that we've been doing business. And there are many reasons for this being a competitive advantage. You can think of the cost of non-compliance, of course, right? It's I'm not even talking about the explosions, but some years ago I was working in a company that was dealing with another company who was importing facial creams into Asia. And they were doing that, paying a modest 5% duty, competitive pricing, so low margins. A couple of years earlier, they have made a little change to the formulation. They have added a whitening pigment to sort of make it a little bit more attractive to the Asian market. But they have forgotten to change the HS code. And a couple of years later, it was discovered this is no longer a cream. It is now a cosmetics, 25% duty. So now this company had to pay the duty difference of a low margin product. So sold, you can imagine, you can make up the math there, right? Plus many years there. Very high price to pay for something that really could have been avoided if you had the proper information back then. So the value of that information, very important. I'll give you another example. There's also cost of, you talked about poor quality, Kenn. Cost of poor quality. We all know it's expensive, but just last Friday in my industry, not my company, my industry, the French Ministry of Agriculture announced that they were going to destroy some large sugar beet fields in France. That's 500,000 tons, 500,000 tons of sugar beet that has to be destroyed. That's like 10,000 of these rooms here full of sugar beet destroyed. Right? Why? something had happened with the production, and there were some trace chemicals of some active substances that were not allowed in the EU, and yeah, the rule is the rule, so it had to be destroyed. Can you imagine what happens next, right? Like 273 farmers were affected, so that's 273 lawsuits. So if you're a lawyer, that's an opportunity for you. Price of sugar beet will go up, and also maybe this to you, Tobias. I think they will be needing a new plant manager very soon, so I'll give you the name. So, so there's cost of poor compliance, but there's also value of proper compliance, and I think that's what I want to end with here. Having the confidence to stand any place and speak about compliance and say, we are good at this. It can be in terms of safety. We have a total recordable injury rate at our place at 0.12, which is world class. I mean, no doubt. And when we say this, it's not like, yeah, it's 0.12. No, we can say it proudly because we know that this is the way that we're operating. We know that we are compliant to the processes and the results are speaking for themselves. But also, if you're the CEO, right, you want to stand in front of your investors and say, don't worry, we got this, we are in compliance. Or if you're in sales in front of your key customers, it's a competitive advantage to just say, don't worry, we got this, right? So I'm thinking back to what you were saying there. If one day I'm the CEO of FMC, I want investors to come to me and ask me about compliance so that I can brag about it, and I'll say something like, yes, of course we're compliant. It's a core value of ours. Really.
How do you see compliance role in the green transition?
Yeah, so some of the things we're talking about here is actually, I focus on hard compliance here, right? That's really, really serious, but there's also green compliance. And I think we'll see the boundaries, they will actually sort of start to change a little bit. I mean, you see it in politics. I mentioned the Christmas party. There is a lot of sort of things that are not hard law, but they're also not soft law. There's somewhere in between. And I don't think we have a choice as companies and also as individuals to be on the forefront of that. So when it comes to green compliance, which is, I would include everything about sustainability here, right? What really matters for us is that we have to be able to speak with confidence about what is it that we're doing as a company. So you see these days that you got your annual report, the financial one, and you got your sustainability report, and they are sometimes equally important, right? And most of the questions are actually coming to green compliance. So I know it's a bit of a leading question, but clearly green compliance is something that matters a lot to us. As a company working in crop protection, you can't avoid looking at green compliance also. It's the way that we're distributing, it's the way we're producing, it's the way that we are developing the products so that we are doing more good than bad to the world as we're using our products.
Thank you. I'm Carsten Lindhardt from BioGrell. One very basic question, I think, for you, Kim, because I think I know what Ken's going to say about this. But if you should select an EQMS system, what we talked to quite a few and companies providing this service, and they almost everybody say almost the same, right? So when you're going out selecting these systems, what would be sort of the key things, the key values or key points you would go for?
Relevant question. How do you make the selection, right? So we're a $5 billion business, right? So we are used to work with the biggest and boldest of everything. So of course we got the latest SAP implementation, and we tend to look at things that are well established and big, because there's some kind of safety net in that. In this, and we also do have quality management systems that are from the leading vendors here. But when we're looking for something a little bit more cutting edge, it's a little bit difficult sometimes to get it from the establishment, you would say. It takes time, who to talk to, what is it actually we look for, are they sort of encroaching on the existing business? And that can be a little bit of a challenge for us. We don't have sort of one solution to solve that. But in this case here, working with a startup actually gives a lot of flexibility for us. We can think about it really fast. We can make developments really fast. We can shut it down really fast if it doesn't work, right? And that actually helps us in order to have that cutting edge and being in front of or ahead of the curve here. So I'd say established companies in this field here, very important, very good. If you want to do the next step, I think you need to sort of talk to both parties and see who has the best ideas and who has the best technology to support it, but equally important, who has the best attitude to get it done.
As I recall, your IT department is around 75,000 people.
No, that's not a department. They're independent companies, but on their own merit and all stock listed separately,
Yeah.
right? Under a common foundation or the overall values of the group.
Yeah, but it makes you
London
very
and
qualified as head of Europe to try to talk about criteria for selecting. So maybe you can share some of your.
I think very good presentations by both Kim and Kenn, you, Neil. And I think the aspects is all large companies or even small companies have data across the organization, which addresses the compliance issues, the hard as well as the soft, which you talked about. But the connection of data and the decision making is what companies fail to do. So you have the systems in place, but is the data available, and then is it going to the right decision makers to take those decisions what to do and what not to do? So you have in large companies SAP systems, we have it. SAP is just one example. It could be Oracle, it could be Microsoft, it could be any other, right? And then you have QMS systems, the compliance systems we all have for both the hard laws as well as the soft laws which make organizations and companies competitive. Now, but we still fail, and then we do a root cause analysis. And in most of the root cause analysis, it is the data at the wrong place, right? And then even if you have the data with some people in the organization, they do not have the courage to go to their boss who will take that decision to stop it or to go. So this is where connectivity of data is very important, and to reach to the right level in the organization, because all systems are good at the end of the day, but how do you play around with it? That's my opinion.
And I will say short that the key takeaways is that we cannot have anything approved or launched on the market if we not have the documentation right. So it's quite simple. It has to be right, or else we will be stopped.
Yeah.
So I would say that's more or less the short part of it.
Yeah.
And it has to be taken. I would say the faster you can start with the documentation, the faster you can get to the market.
Yeah. So you can shorten time to market by starting early. You can make cost lower if you are structured and maybe more digitalized compared to 20 years ago.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we compare small companies and large corporations, you've been in a very large corporation. And
I would say so. Yeah.
In a startup. Well, how would you comment on that?
That the large company has already a system in place for sure, because within the medical devices, but they struggle as well because everybody has to learn, and somebody has learned something from other companies. So again, it's a learning curve, and the faster you can get a more uniform system, the better it is. And I would say also that it has to be as simple to use. So how to use it has to be very, very simple, and not for a commercial, but when I was presented for this system, it is very easy to use, because you just drag and drop more or less documents from one place to the other. And that's, I would say, is very, very important as well.
But basically what we see now is that that sustainability and meeting at least the basic compliance regulation is a must to, or a kind of license to do business. So there are a number of stakeholders that are really concerned about how companies are meeting, you can say, expectations for sustainability. So that may be investors and financiers, it may be customers, it may be governments or the public authorities that have these expectations. And there are a number of I would say frameworks that you can apply to. So there's the GRI, there's SASB if it's a concern to investors, etc. And you have to maneuver in this, and you also have to maneuver in different kinds of frameworks depending on who are you trying to address with this. Now what I see, so I have worked with compliance in my IBM time within financial sector, and what I see is there is a need also for technology to be not only forward-looking, as I think Kenn touched on, to say what's actually coming and how is it going to affect our business, and how can we prepare to be able to meet this compliance, but also to be you can see kind of proactive within the business processes. So what I work with in the financial sector was really to see how can you actually monitor what's going on. So if you are dealing with a certain customer, a certain products at a certain time, what should you be aware of if you are going to do a transaction with that customer? So that may be within the know your customer, or within fraud monitoring, or just the approval processes. So that's very important that at some point of time these systems are also going to integrate within the business processes and actually react down on the, I would say, also on the operational level when the transaction is occurring. So you know that you are not making this mistake. I think as Kim very illustratively made, to say suddenly there is something turning a product from a kind of or turning that into another regulation, and you have a heavy duty on the product. So the systems have to be to use, and this is where you use AI and you're really kind of integrating into the business processes. And this is
first of all, if you look at it internally, it's incredibly important that we are compliant ourselves, because we have a lot of GDPR compliance requirements that we need to adhere to. So internally, it's terribly important for us. But more importantly, perhaps, if you look at it from a market perspective, because, as you say, compliance is not any longer just a nice to have, but it's almost a sine qua non to be competitive these days, not only to fulfill and make the legislators happy, but also to make your customers and your partners happy. Then the role as Chief Compliance Officer has changed incredibly from being a more technical role to a much more strategic, much more holistic, much more outward-looking role that will safeguard the competitiveness of any company, and that drives the need for a different kind of talent to take the Chief Compliance Officer role.
Yeah, and how do you see the supply and demand at present?
I think we're in the midst of the storm. There are some very good, if we look at it from the Chief Compliance Officer candidate pool perspective, I think you will find some quite good ones these days. I think the supply outstrips the demand still quite significantly. So we have some way to go there still.
I often see companies buying technology and expecting it to solve the compliance issues, but they forget about the people and change, or underestimate the continuous effort needed to ensure the right usage of compliance technology to harvest the benefits. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I think it plays well to my initial remark that this has moved beyond a technical exercise and a technical function to a much more strategic role, and also calls for people who have very strong communication skills. I think one of the challenges in many companies is for the Chief Compliance Officer to actually elevate this topic to a strategic, executive, or even board level. I think more and more executive teams and boards understand the necessity, but there's still quite a long way to go. And as Chief Compliance Officer, to actually understand, make the top level understand that this is a strategic imperative and not only a ticking the box exercise. I think that's the way forward.